Ampetawashte Medaki epi. Machiampi wi machiapi lena shichango lakota imataha. Chante washte nape chayusapi. Good morning, relatives. I'm Cheryl Crazy Bull. I'm the president and CEO of the American Indian College Fund. I'm a Shichango Lakota from the Rosewood Reservation in South Dakota. I welcome all of you here today with a good heart and a handshake. Thank you for joining our Indigenous Activism Speaker Series. When COVID-19 arrived and all of our lives changed so dramatically, and then we had the very tragic deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and the real kind of public uniting and outcry that occurred that with the Black Lives Matter movement, which helped lift up the Indigenous movement that we've had for generations in the preservation of our sovereignty and in supporting our Indigenous identities and our self-determination. We decided that we wanted to do something proactive. And what we did was we reached out then to set up this speaker series with many activists and people that are working in our communities in real important social justice work, including the census and native vote, and which we'll be talking about today. I always like to start the series by just taking a few moments to call upon the Creator to be with us as we gather here in our technology circle. I ask each of you to think of all of our people who need resources and need support, that we should pray that our leaders are able to get those things for them and that our people have the confidence and the wherewithal to bring the resources that they need to their families. Especially want to pray for those people who are sick and people who have lost loved ones, and pray for the journeys of those who have already left. I think it's a really hard time for our families, and many people in leadership roles seem to be disconnected from that. And I just really pray that the Creator touches their hearts and helps them to see that they need to do better work, that they need to have clear minds and good hearts in this space. And I just want to take a moment here to acknowledge also that we are really particularly focused on our Native students. We want them to be able to use their voices to create greater visibility for our communities, because we know that our visibility helps create equity. Our people have always joined together to do this work. And here at the American Indian College Fund, we wanted to reach out to activists and, like I mentioned, other leaders in the Indigenous community to bring this series, which is a seven-part series of free webinars. You can look at the previous webinars that we've had by going to the College Fund's YouTube channel. I want to, before I introduce our next speaker, just take a moment here to acknowledge that today is the funeral of John Lewis. Many of you may know that John Lewis has been a leader for 60 years in the civil rights movement, particularly focused on the right of people of color to vote. And as people bid him, their final goodbyes on his earthly journey, and take him to his final resting place, I think it is very fitting that the College Fund is having this discussion here today about the census and about voting at the time when we're all celebrating the work of John Lewis and looking for ways that we can continue the work that he has laid out for all of us to do. Today's webinar is titled Our Community, Our Power, Our Future, the 2020 Census and Vote. Really happy to feature Jasha Lyons Echo-Hawk, who's a lifelong justice seeker, a community builder, and in keeping with her commitment to good health, a part-time marathoner. She's a tribal citizen of the Seminole Nation, and as well as having a Pawnee, Iowa, Omaha, and Creek Nation heritages. She's organized in rural Oklahoma. We were really happy to have a community-based activist join us. She has worked in many areas that are very important, particularly I believe as Unchi, as a grandmother myself, and the importance of many of the things that she's worked on: access to healthcare, violence against women, breast and breastfeeding advocacy, birth justice, food sovereignty, gun violence prevention, criminal justice reform, equity, and leadership. And she's also been a political candidate. But if you look at all the places that she's worked, those are entwined with each other. She's weaving together equity and justice and the health and well-being of women and children in particular. She's also a college graduate of Northern Oklahoma College and Oklahoma State University. Currently, Jasha is practicing as a two-spirit birth doula, which I think is just amazing. I've become more familiar in the last 2 years with that movement in the Indigenous community, and it's just really great to think of the ways that we're going back to what is our natural birthright as women, and being able to care for ourselves and each other during pregnancy and delivery. So she's also a student midwife. We want to honor her for being part of the inaugural Indian Collective Changemaker Fellowship Group. I think that's a real honor. She's currently working as a census community builder for the Oklahoma Policy Institute. She has a very active lifestyle with her husband, Bunky. Many of you know her husband, Bunky Echo-Hawk, who's a well-known artist and activist himself, and a very good friend of the American Indian College Fund and their children. I also want to recognize that we may have on our, as participants, members of the College Fund Student Ambassador Program. Our ambassador program teaches our students the skills that they need to be public advocates. So in many ways, the kind of work that Jasha is doing is the work that our student ambassador.
Noa Akitaru, Tatasati Tata Chikstahiku, Jeffka, Jasha Lyons Echo-Hawk. Thank you so much, Mado, for the kind remarks and your prayers and statements this morning. President Crazy Bull, I appreciate y'all thinking of all of our people, and rest in power to Representative Lewis, who, just like many of our ancestors, was on the front lines and shed blood just, to ensure the future of us, the descendants. And I feel, as a descendant, it is my motivation in life, in this world, to make sure that those prayers that were said for me are carried on as well. So I didn't quite hear the end there. I don't know if that was on my end or your end, but so I'm just jumping in here. Thank you to all of you who are participating in this webinar, watching, and hopefully sharing out this particular message, which I don't feel ownership over, but I'm just a vessel, if you will, or a tool or an asset to elevating the visibility of Native voices in census participation and voter engagement. So, I think what I'll share today really isn't too different from what any of you could do, or maybe even have done. And maybe it can be affirming for you in your work as you pursue justice and education and everything that, is going to create sustainability in our tribal communities and beyond. So yeah, kudos to you all for being in college, for pursuing higher education, especially given the barriers that are in place, and some have been purposely put in place, while others are just barriers that people haven't quite seen in such a large way. So yeah, thank you so much for being students, and again, thank you for joining. So as Cheryl mentioned, I do a lot. I do a lot of advocacy, and I ultimately feel like I'm a justice seeker at heart. Whenever I've been a small child, I have never not looked at a situation and wondered, why is it we do it this way? Why is it this particular tradition, or why is what is the context of it? I'm always searching for the context of the root reasons why we do some of the things we do. And some of the times we find out that, it's just always been done, but it doesn't make it just, it doesn't make it right, doesn't make it moral. And I've found myself in a place now where, yeah, I am pursuing this birth work, but there's also impacts to just even the aspects of my work, and then just all of us, our everyday lives are very much impacted in ways that reflect on what we can do in census participation and encouragement of census, the count, and then also in voter engagement. They're not the only ways we can pursue justice, but they are definitely tools we could definitely levy in our favor, reclaiming, our power, land back, if you will. So, as Cheryl grounded us in this time that we're in, this time of really visible change. Some of you probably have long been saying the things that are now very, very visible to a larger part of society, as well as seeing the disparity, the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 in your communities. And so this is why I think it's so important that this series happens, and also that this particular topic is being brought to light in this activism speaker series. Some people may not look at it as activism, but you can make of it as you need to. And so, yeah, again, just very honored to be here. So I'll go ahead and explain just kind of a layout of what I hope to impart with on you today, is just to give you an overview of census, of Native voting, and then maybe examples of what I've done in my work. And then we're going to bring up some images that I hope you all will engage in giving you an idea of what you can do, even just like as you are an individual, not even tied to any group or organization. And then we'll have Q&A later. So as far as the census goes, that is something that is not easily understood, especially like just to anybody. If you're here for hearing this, like even for the first time, it's like, no worries, I'll definitely gently explain it. So really, it's just a large population count. We're counting all the physical bodies in the United States and 5 US territories. It is a US constitutional mandate that every person living in the United States as of April 1st of a census year, so April 1st of 2020, gets counted, regardless of citizenship status or immigration status. And the census will seek different ways, the Bureau will seek different ways to try and get people counted. So Census Enumeration Day was April 1st of this year, and it's every 10 years we do this count. So this isn't like an every year thing, it's a decade, a decade, a decade. So just think about it as in years that end in 0. It is the census year. As far as census impacts, it is basically, they use the population count to determine how to distribute federal funds. And federal funds are taxpayer dollars. So like if you're a homeowner, you pay taxes. You buy things, you pay taxes. You work, you pay taxes. And the government collects all those taxes as billions of dollars, and then they use the census data to figure out how to distribute in these 10-year pieces, these 10-year segments. So whoever gets counted in 2020 will determine the next 10 years of how federal dollars come into our communities. And the dollars are used in our communities in terms of healthcare, education, agriculture, transportation, housing, like a number of ways. And then more specifically, when it comes to healthcare, it's like Medicaid, it's like children's health insurance programs. It's where do we build the next hospital? Where do we put this particular clinic? Where do we station medical supplies? And in terms of COVID-19, we really need to know that. In terms of transportation, it's like, where do we build roads? Where do communities need public transportation? yeah, the layout of your communities. In terms of public education, it's the school and breakfast lunch programs. It's making sure that students have the technology and the books that they need. I don't know if you come from a state where your teachers either did a walkout or education is not like a fully funded or well-funded, excuse me, like your state's not fully funding education, public education. Like my state, Oklahoma, we're probably like bottom 10 for the lowest funding for per pupil. That's huge, because then also we don't really pay our teachers a wage where they are able to just live on the one job. And it's like that in a lot of places for a lot of jobs, but in particular, a lot of these teachers end up having to shoulder materials for their classrooms, sometimes materials for their students. So it's like an extra burden on these educators, in addition to these students not receiving their fair share. We're cheating our students when we do not give them the appropriate funding that they need. And in some way, the census count can remedy, the proper distribution of those funds. Let's see, I mentioned healthcare, I mentioned education, transportation, housing. So some of you might be familiar with tribal housing, or even just public housing. Those programs are dependent on census numbers, on the body count, on the number of people in their community. They need to be able to determine how many of these houses do we need, how many families are in this area, how many children, how many elderly, how many disabled people, in order to make sure that there's accurate and appropriate housing. I'm sure y'all are, aware that there's not enough housing or affordable housing or low income housing for our communities. And so this is why the census, the count is so important in terms of the housing topic. And then let's, even more specifically, in terms of how we're impacted right now in 2020 with the COVID-19 viral pandemic. So some of you might be following federal legislation, and at the federal level, they had the CARES Act, which distributed funds to our tribal communities. Some of that funding was dependent on census numbers for tribes, not the tribal enrollment or tribal citizenship or tribal membership numbers. Your tribes keep their own numbers. A lot of the COVID CARES Act funding was distributed based on census numbers. So I'll give you an example of how this, like why this matters. When Choctaw Nation did their census in 2010, they had their members, complete the census, and the government, the Census Bureau, only recognized it was approximately 50,000 Choctaw tribal members. That is not the number of Choctaw citizens that Choctaw Nation was reporting within their registry. They had, I think it was about 120,000 that were not recognized as Choctaw tribal members, because according to the US Census Bureau, they would only recognize Choctaw tribal members if they listed the federal registered name, which is Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. Anybody who put Choctaw, anybody who put Choctaw Nation was not recognized within the US Census. So this created this severe shortfall in their budget for their nation, going from 2010 to 2020. Now, in 2010, you couldn't have predicted that a viral pandemic would have occurred. I mean, maybe these really experienced researchers, these immunologists, folks who have dealt with like epidemics, maybe could have predicted it, but not in such an amount that we would have been like, oh, this is how the Census 2020 data comes into play in 2010. So in terms of that number of 55,000 Choctaw tribal members, that's what the government distributes based on COVID CARES Act distribution on that census data, which is from 2010, which by now is so outdated, but definitely is, alarming, to say the least, that you deserve so much more for your tribal members, especially when you're a community that's so disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. So this is why, we need to know not just about the census, but what it does, so that you can communicate that back to your communities. Now, how do you do the census? There's some resources that are listed in the chat, thankfully, where you can go and see the number of ways. So for this 2020 census, it's like really the first time where it's widely available online. Before, it used to be old school pen and paper forms you have to mail or the phone number. But this year, they've added the online access. So you can truly be at your couch, in your bed, not even like fully dressed and put together, and take your phone, look up 2020 census.gov and fill out your census. And then it only takes roughly about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how quickly you read through the questions. And the census is confidential. It is protected by federal law that no one from the Bureau can disclose any private information. So anybody who's concerned about citizenship, it won't be disclosed to ICE. Anybody who's concerned about reporting to law enforcement, it won't either. Because I know there are some of us who come from communities where you might live in a tribal house, right? A government house, and you are like 4 people on the lease, but you have like 8 or 10 or 12. Basically more people on the lease, and it could get you in trouble, which sometimes those consequences are like they're gonna kick you out of the house if they find out you have more than you're supposed to. Well, the census doesn't release that information. You're not gonna be reported to your landlord. You're not gonna be reported to housing, whoever that is, tribal or city or public. You're not gonna be reported to law enforcement, even if you do have somebody who might have a warrant or, might be, somebody might be, law enforcement might want to be interested in who's in your home. They can't report that. So just know that that's confidential, and that's why you need to do the census too. It's because why do you have so many people in your home? They probably don't have enough housing access for them, so they need to be counted. Even if you're not related to those people in your home, they need to be counted. And it's not necessarily like all adults, it's everybody. Children are the most undercounted community, like regardless of race in the US. We undercount age 0 to 5 the most, and then I think it's 6 to 9 is like the second most undercounted group regardless of race. So in terms of like a childhood, like a kid could be born in 2020 and it might be 2030 before they finally see if we don't get a full count in 2020, if your communities, your states, your counties, your tribes don't count everybody in 2020, their whole childhood basically is going to be underfunded. Their public education needs are not going to be well served. And as those of you who are in education right now or in higher ed, you're probably very aware of what your education path looked like, or it's very close to your memory right now. And so just like yourself, all these babies deserve to have the most appropriate and numerous resources, abundant resources as possible, especially because it's paid for. We just need to bring it back. Let's see. I think, yeah. So then again, it's not just adults, it's everybody, every living person. As long as they were born by April 1st, 2020, they can be counted. They're 99, they can be counted, 99 plus. So let me think. Sorry, I went off a little bit. It's critically important that we get the representation that we deserve. And the census impacts redistricting or congressional reapportionment. These are kind of like big words, not that anybody's not able to understand, like how to look them up. But in terms of what that means, that just is basically saying that you have your states and they are cut into districts based on population size. And within the districts, that's how they determine how you elect a representative. In terms of non-tribal government, so your cities, your school board districts, your state legislative districts, and congressional districts. So there are a lot of states who are available to have more representation. I believe it's Wyoming that is the state with only 1 representative, and they are so close to getting another district cut so that they could have at least 2 representatives to represent their state. And what that means is the current population data supports under they call it the Wyoming Rule. The under that current rule, there's like so many thousands of people that that is reflected in their representation in Congress. You increase that number, you get more representation. If your representative that is currently serving you is not the one that is best serving your community's needs, your interests, probably specifically as a Native person, that matters. So it is so important to make sure that your representation is diverse as your community is as reflective as your community is. And so this is how also census data or the population count impacts that part of our civic engagement. And two, you don't necessarily, again, like I said, you don't have to be like 18 and up to like be the person to fill out your census. You could be like the 15-year-old. In fact, I've heard some recommendations that it's at least 15 and over. Y'all should be counting, individually if somebody's not going to count for you, or in terms of how you want to mark your households. So in Native households, especially if you have a mixed household, like a mixed race household, you would want to list the Native tribal affiliation first for whoever that is. If that is not the parent, maybe it's a single parent, maybe it's a single mother, and maybe she's not Native, but she has Native kids. Well, she would want to list her kid as the person filling out the census who's Native, because then that goes back into your tribal communities. So it's not just the person living in the city getting the federal sending that city dollars. It's the federal government also recognizing like, oh, they're in that city and they're this tribal member, so we need to give that money to that tribal community. And it's self-identified, so you don't necessarily need to like if you're intertribal like me, like you're all these round dance songs, but you're a tribal citizen of many tribes and you're living in a particular tribal community. Maybe you want to count yourself of the particular tribal community you're living in because you are able to benefit the most access to those resources. Or you could go based on your enrollment. It's completely up to you. There's no like right or wrong way to do it. Your tribal nations should be able to tell you though how to fill out the correct name on the census. Do I fill out Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, or is it okay for me to just put Seminole Nation and they're going to know which tribe I'm from? That's something that your tribes should be doing. I will say in Oklahoma, not we have 39 tribal jurisdictions, and not all of those tribal jurisdictions or tribal nations have complete count committees. And what those are basically groups within your tribes or your governments that have invested interest or access to being able to, widely spread out the census count and information on the census. If your tribe doesn't, you need to talk to them about that. If your tribal count operations have been held up, there are a number of ways we can brainstorm how to get through that. I know NCAI has, they listed the NCAI resource through the chat. They are a great resource overall for Indian country in terms of the count. Myself, I can be a resource for sure in Oklahoma, and I don't mind helping outside of that. Any way I can be a resource, I'm here for y'all. Because, like you, I care so deeply about our communities, the specific ones I come from, as well as the whole of Indian country, because we're all in this together. So in going forward in terms of like Native vote, this is where we start thinking about like everyday things that affect our life. Like policy it's a word, and it's like, sometimes people are like, oh, I don't want to talk about politics, but really every bit of your life is politics, is political. I mean, our very existence is political. There were several tactics, policies by the US government to not just eradicate us, but circumvent us in the ways, in all the ways that they thought they could. And even to this day, you all are very aware that that's still happening. The latest SCOTUS ruling on Creek jurisdiction on Indian territory here in Oklahoma, now that's up in the air with Congress, even though SCOTUS was like, the Supreme Court of the United States was saying, yeah, Creek Nation never ceded, it's their land. Now you've got people that are not necessarily working in favor of sovereignty, trying to act against it or finding ways to minimize sovereignty. So it's incredibly important when you think of that. It's incredibly important too when you think of who are helping your communities through this pandemic? Where is the aid coming from? How is it coming? Who's holding it up? This current administration did hold up the process for a long time, which caused undue hardship. That's really just an understatement, to say the least. You know, many of our community members continue to get sick. Many of our community members continue to pass in these large ways. And of course, if you are somebody who's deeply connected to your tribal communities and your ceremonies, you understand that that's also, you know, not part of your grieving process. So this is where, you know, I want to really push and emphasize why it's so important that you pay attention to that engagement in terms of that aspect of this COVID-19 pandemic. On the other side, and something that I myself am working within my school district here, is I'm really starting to look at my school board, because of their recommendations for our schools reopening plans. And then at the higher level at the state, I'm looking at their school reopening plans as well, and proposals that needed to be mandates, but were only recommendations. I say this because we as Native people have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. I know in Oklahoma, as of last week when I was looking at the data, I think last Thursday to be specific, 7.78% of COVID-19 infection is on us, on Natives. Native Americans are 7.78% of COVID-19 infections or COVID positive cases. We are only 9.4% of the state's population. That is huge. That is a lot of us, like, per capita being infected. And I didn't even look at the death rate. It's really disheartening, but it is also high. In terms of racial category, that's disproportionate. That shows, you know, our community is particularly vulnerable to this disease. And it also should illustrate to those people we elected, or to those people maybe you didn't elect but that serve you, they need to pay attention to reopening plans and its disproportionate impacts to highly vulnerable communities, such as the Native community here in Oklahoma, where we are the second largest racial group in the state. And also to impress upon those leaders to definitely bring in tribal leaders or tribal government members to be part of these conversations and thinking about school reopening. So these are, again, really current issues that are affecting everyday lives. And even you as college students, those of you that are, you know, thinking about your school's reopening plans, thinking about how that's gonna best serve you and your families, because some of you are, you know, maybe had to move back home to stay with your families. Some of you might be people who have families, like your parents, or maybe you take care of elderlies in your home. You know, it's these things that we think about, but also do have political or policy implications. So this is something, you know, that, again, that I feel so drawn to and so passionate in advocating for our people to not just know this information, but know how it affects you or affects your sibling, your mama, your daddy, your neighbors, however, so that you feel so moved and empowered to not just like tell people go vote, like this is why you need to vote, or, you know, this is on the line, or this is gonna, you know, we're not gonna have money for this, and, you know, because we all deserve to have our voices recognized, even when it just seems like everybody's, you know, busy trying to cover our mouths. So I want to go ahead. I feel like I've talked for a really long time, a lot longer than I meant. For those of you that are still with us, we do have an engagement portion of this webinar. And if I could get Carrie to bring up the image, I think you called it Jasha image. So what we're going to do here, and I'd like for you to comment in the chat, what we've been able to do through my organization in terms of outreach, because yes, right now we're not able to really be truly out and about in public, like engaging in this very physical way, is virtual outreach. And I know some of you are probably of either the millennial or Gen Z age, or maybe you know people, or maybe you're Gen X. I can't remember after millennial, but maybe you're of an older generation that is like tech savvy, or you have a pretty established following on your social medias. I like memes. I think memes are good ways to convey all kinds of messages. And I also am a big fan of just like visual imagery. I don't know if anybody can see the picture yet, Carrie. I think it's just on your like your computer screen right now. I don't know if anybody can see that. There we go. Cool. So that is actually a screenshot of me that a coworker sent to me when one of our events got Zoom bombed. And honestly, it was a really to maybe dramatize, it was really traumatic. It was really disruptive. But I just was like, my face, oh my goodness. So we had fun with the image though, and we've made memes regarding this particular image. And so I'm encouraging all of you who are on this webinar to meme caption this either in favor of the census or in favor of voting. For me, one of the memes I created was, what you mean I can just, what was it? Oh my God, I'm gonna botch it now. Maybe I'll look it up before I start trying to recite or from my memory. But yeah, it's just like being able to see what you look like, or see an image, something that, or a meme, you know, there's all kinds of like other images you see in your socials that you can use and create a meme capture. One of them was that Zoom hack though, in terms of voting and census engagement. Where did it go? Oh my goodness, I think I lost it. But yeah, if we could get some engagement here, if y'all can put in your best ideas, I'll pick from one of them. Don't be shy. And I'll send you something. Giveaway time. Let's see, what do we got here? When your Nana throws away, that's a good one. So true. And if any of you do have census mailers, they are prepaid postage. So you can, like, you don't have to pay for the postage. You can just fill it out and put it up. Oh, I forgot to mention too, the Census Enumerators, which are the door knockers, are now starting to come around. They were delayed for quite some time, which did delay physical count of people for people who have not done the census online or through the mail or by phone. They are sending the census enumerators to knock on your doors to count you. Now, I know some of you really don't like visitors, or you hide when somebody knocks on the door. So if you don't want that, if you want to stop the knock, so to speak, then do your census right now. Like if you're right here with me, either do it right now or text yourself a reminder and be like, I got to do my census after I get off this webinar. Also, you can easily text that to your folks. You know, you can check in with your auntie, be like, hey, what's up? How are you? Just worried about or wondering about you, seeing how you're doing. Oh, by the way, have you completed your census? Here's the website. Like, it's really that simple. You could do a whole group message that way. Let's see. Geez, do the census. No, you can't count your res dogs. That's funny. I don't know if that counts though, President. I want to see some from the students or the panel or the participants. Volunteering to pick up elders. Oh, I don't know if I'm supposed to be reading the questions yet. I was just really curious about the census for people to meme or caption this. Yeah, the face I make when they say the census doesn't count. It's true. So I know there's several national Native organizations that are working on census efforts in addition to just local community efforts. I believe it's the Urban Indian Health Institute has done some great work on census engagement, getting out the count. But they have this beautiful hashtag that's hashtag statistically significant. And this is kind of a call out to how we show up in data. So in terms of research, any area of research, a lot of times some of these spaces will say, or will only do research on like white Americans, Black Americans, Hispanic or Latinx Americans. They might do Asian Americans, and then they might not have information on Asian Americans or us, Native Americans. And sometimes it'll be because, oh, well, you're statistically insignificant. Like you're less than 2% of the US population. There's not enough of you to research this. And that is not right. You know, each percentage point is a person, right? Each of us is a voice. And so that's why, you know, in terms of representation, in terms of a message, statistically significant is like asserting our power, asserting our voices, showing up and demanding visibility on our communities. So let's see, we'll give it, let's go another minute. Two so far. And I'm still trying to find my meme that I made, that I was so proud, and now I can't even remember. Guess it doesn't count if I can't remember. Oh, I don't know how to say that. Is it Yadale? Not your census number, do your census. All right, we're gonna close it. Oh yeah, the census is serious. Okay, so if Felicia, Brittany, Wilhelmina, and Leanne, if somehow the college fund can get me y'all's information. Yeah, and I'm so sorry if I botched up your language. If y'all can get their information, I will get them something, a giveaway. Let's see. Thank you for that. So our next picture that I would like to bring up, Carrie, if you could, was the other one, the I count. So this is just something we did within the workspace to encourage our employees to create an image and explain why they count. And then we, in Oklahoma, our hashtag is okay, let's count. Okay, and then let's count. Of course, you could always use hashtag census 2020 or hashtag Indian country counts. I think that's the NCAI hashtag. Hashtag statistically significant. I mean, you could do anything really. I mean, hashtags are fun. When it comes up, you'll be able to see what I mean. Cool. Okay, so that's me. And I just put it on a whiteboard. I count, hashtag, okay, let's count. And for my caption, I said, I count because my kids need fully funded public education. Because as a survivor, I know fully funded domestic violence programs save lives. Because I'm a working parent who needs to ensure child programs are fully funded. Because maternal health programs are so important and critical to public health. Because I'm the head of household responsible for counting everyone who lives with me. Because we deserve fair political representation. Because our elders deserve to be taken care of through affordable housing, utility, and meal programs. Because I'm Seminole, Pawnee, Creek, Iowa, and Omaha. Because I'm hashtag statistically significant. So yeah, I just, you know, this is a simple photo. If you have a whiteboard, or if you have, you know, something, even like cardboard boxes, maybe some of you have been ordering things and having them delivered, so you might have an abundance of cardboard or paper products. And, you know, you can easily write something like that, like I count, and maybe your community's hashtag, maybe your tribal nation has a hashtag, or you can use, you know, again, the larger hashtag of Census 2020 or 2020 Census. think either one works. And then just posting, you know, why you count, why it matters that we be counted. You could even do this for like I vote and say why you would, you know, why you vote, what it means to you. I think just coming from your heart, coming from your reasons are very sufficient, especially in terms of just conveying your message, your voice, and then just like posting it. Even you could send these pictures, you know, to your family, like, hey, I haven't seen you in a long time, and I know you haven't seen me. I just wanted to show you what I'm up to. And then you can send this picture. You know, it sparks a conversation. It's really in some ways it's that simple. If you know you're not on social media or whatever, I mean, you could even email this. You email, do a group email. I mean, back in the day, oh my goodness, I think they used to do these things called chain emails, and it used to be. I think that's when yeah, then people were getting spammed and stuff. But I mean, you could do this, not that, you know, you're asking for anybody other than them to just like do the census or to get registered to vote. But yeah, that's just, you know, something simple. So again, for any of you who wish to share or could share, um, you know, why you count, why you matter, and yeah, just consider something as simple as this for your efforts, whether you as an individual are engaging this way, or if you want to get tied to, you know, your tribe's efforts in census and voting engagement, because you can still do this. Like in terms of voting, it's not just, you know, related to non-tribal voting. It, you know, you could totally do a tribal voting campaign, because I also understand that in our tribal communities we still don't have the number of voters we could have at the, you know, at the ballot box, voting for our tribal governments. And so sometimes even within your tribal governments you get people that you're like, what, why, who voted, who didn't vote. I know here at our recent Pawnee Nation elections, I really think it's like 20% of people who could vote voted. Again, that's really sad, you know, like in terms of grades, 20% of 100%, you know, failing. Uh, so you get who you get, because the voting population is only, you know, certain people. You want a more well voiced, well supported vote, then you have to encourage your people to do so. And it's helpful too if you can identify the barriers that prevents them from doing so, not shaming people into like, why didn't you do this? You know, why didn't you vote? I don't think that's very helpful for anybody. I don't think anybody really wants to be shamed out. I mean, you can tease, right? But I think being able to see some voting barriers or barriers in general regarding to either one of these topics is necessary in order to ensure access and into order to ensure equity. So I'm gonna pose this to you all. I didn't think I saw anybody post anything yet, but so for those of you who maybe never considered this, and this is for non-tribal elections, I'm not sure what they do in tribal elections. You probably have your own like commissions or election commissions, so you'd probably have to be like yeah, I'll just go with non-tribal. There is a shortage of poll workers, and poll workers in this time, well, in general, they tend to be much older folks. They tend to be elderly folks. There are some states who are not being mindful of the safety or ensuring safety in the right to vote at the polls, in-person voting. So when you have poll workers who could be more vulnerable to COVID-19, you know, they might not show up like they do every election season. They might want to stay home, which means that's less polls that are open because they don't have enough poll workers. So in some of us who are maybe not as vulnerable, who might be of the population that's not as impacted by a COVID-19 infection. I'm not saying risk your life, but I'm just merely suggesting that if you feel like you could, you know, show up in that way, I would definitely suggest that maybe you go out there and you see, you know, about becoming a poll worker. You do get paid. I think each state is different in how they pay their workers, so you have to look up that information. And I don't think that information was included in the resources that are in the chat, But I know that I think it's the election, it's like eac.gov maybe, election commission, a larger national election commissions that gives all the information out for each state on what the criteria is for being a poll worker. You do have to be a U.S. citizen to do this. And I think most of the time you do have to be at minimum 18 years of age or older. So you could be a high schooler, 18-year-old high schooler, working the voting polls in your community. But also it gives you insight too into this process. It gives you insight into what goes on behind the scenes. And really, you know, if you can quell or have some kind of impact for folks who, you know, claim that voter fraud is rampant. I think sometimes when we do, you know, when there's not a whole truth or even, you know, just disinformation actively like that, it does disenfranchise our more marginalized community members, or those of us who already have maybe a distrust of this process or the government. So, you know, seeing somebody like yourself at the polls, to me, is also the same as seeing somebody like yourself telling them, you know, why I counted myself in the census or why I voted in this election. I mean, you don't have to tell anybody your political views or you know, who you voted for, but just, you know, encouraging in this way, I think is so powerful overall. So with that, we have about 5 minutes, and I didn't realize I was going to talk this long, and I appreciate all of you who had who offered what you did for our memes. Hopefully you've generated ideas, but yeah, I think it's Q&A time.
Yeah, that's okay. We did have a recommendation from Dina that you could also pick up people's census forms for them and drop them off at the post office. I know my internet is showing up as unstable, so I hope I'm coming through. But Jasha, I just really want to thank you for being real. One of the important things we've tried to convey at the College Fund is that that's my money that Congress is allocating. That's my money that the state legislature or the county or the city is allocating. And I want it to be allocated to people who need services, people who need support. I want a good infrastructure, good safety net, good education. And I can get that influence by voting. And so I think that's real important. And then we've been kind of tracking in our tribal communities where the tribal colleges are, you know, and we're alarmed that the census participation isn't as good as we would like it to be. Not only for all the reasons that you shared, but also because we use the census to tell a story. So we use the census to show that there's a big gap. There's almost double the number of people in the United States have a college degree compared to American Indian Alaska Native peoples. And so we use that census data to tell the gap story so that people will give us resources so we can give out scholarships. So the census has so many ways that we can use it. And I just think it was really nice of you to share both the ways that people can participate, but also the circumstances that kind of cause people sometimes to be fearful. So I don't know if anybody has a pressing question. Otherwise, I urge you to go to the College Fund's website, go to our advocacy link, and you can see all the upcoming events that are part of this series. You'll also be able to see the links to the YouTube channel that will show the recorded series. We thank you, Jasha, for joining us. We hope you have a really great week, and we really honor and appreciate all the work that you've done. So, thank you.
Mado.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.